Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Safe Defend Live. We do this every Friday at 9:30 Central Time. We love having you here, and make sure you go check out Safe Defend on the YouTube channels and Facebook as well. Obviously, we'll repost this though on YouTube. Doug, how are you, brother?
Life is good. I don't complain anymore.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we were part of yesterday. We were part of a group text, and we're seeing a trend I guess it's safe to say a trend, right, Doug?
Yeah, there is an increase in it, and it's the staff safety. What
Yeah.
we're looking at is there have been several school districts that have reported direct assaults by students on faculty. This is mainly happening at the high school level, but we've seen some issues. There was a seventh grade girl that put a teacher in the hospital about 2 months ago, and it it's all compounding the lack of social skills and everything. And these are just some of the symptoms that we can see from sort of that social isolation, and then the 2 years of not having that sort of classroom development. And then as people come back to class, they just don't understand how to handle their frustration or vent that frustration properly within the classroom.
I think there was one district, which we're not going to name, but there was one district that has had, I believe, 3 staff members assaulted in 30 days. Is that right?
Unfortunately, yes. One was an extremely brutal assault that had a sexual component to it, and it is one of those interesting things where the consequences of these, we try and protect the students. Sometimes, especially if they're juvenile, we don't really talk about what's happening to them. And I think that one of the things that schools have to start to look at is, what sort of procedures do you have in place for teachers that are meeting students after class when most of the building is vacant or something like that. Those are the things we need to start to discuss, that a teacher can't just have a student on, hey, why don't you come to my class after school and we'll work on this together. And the teacher volunteers to say, stay a couple hours, or not, sorry, a couple minutes, 15, 20, 30 minutes after. There should be a situation where there's got to be notification there. And probably now, we need to start to look at whether or not these should be supervised, whether or not you should have 2 people, make sure the door is open, all that sort of stuff. And it's just unfortunate, but I think it's just the protocol that need to be put in place is to start making sure that administrators are controlling and being notified when teachers are remaining in the building.
As I've said before, my wife's now retired. She was a career teacher. You can call me whatever you want to call me. I just told her, you're not doing that. I mean, she worked with older kids as well as younger kids, but I'm not going to put yourself in that situation for a variety of reasons. It's unfortunate that's where we are in society today, but we are, and that's something that I was talking to somebody about that asked me about SafeDefend, had seen the Facebook Live reposted, and just asked me about SafeDefend as a company and what you guys do, and led to a lot of different conversations. And I said, the sad thing is there's always been violence in the world. Nobody's saying that's a new thing, but people seem so much more brazen than they used to be about it. I mean, I just don't, what you said earlier, and I understand with the kids not going to brick and mortar schools, and for a couple of years, in some places they never didn't not go to school. I know where I live, we took the position of we're having school, and the kids just kept going to school, and
Right.
So I know it depends on where you're located in the world, and all the different variables. But what I mean, I'm shocked that there's this amount of violence on staff. I'm just shocked by it. I mean, and my point of bringing it up about not being in school, I get that that has an impact, but there's other things we're not talking about that has an impact. Right.
And
I mean, the availability. One thing I'm talking about is, and some people get really mad at me for saying this. But this is me saying this. Phil Nichols, not SafeDefend. I'm just interested in your opinion. Drugs. Drugs aren't new, but now we started legalizing some drugs all over the country. If a kid, takes something and it alters their mood or their or what. I mean, is that something that we're seeing a spike in schools too?
Yeah, let me jump back real quick to the sort of the solution here. Any time that a teacher has to remain in the classroom or be with a kid, there's a very simple solution that schools need to implement, and that is you just create a reoccurring Zoom call. And so then that, you can just go onto Zoom, create this Zoom call. And so if I'm going to be in my classroom with a student, then that means that I'm going to be on the Zoom call. I'm not talking on the Zoom call. I'm not doing anything, but my computer microphone is on. And then if you have any administrator that's sitting in their office, you are literally just having one administrator or one secretary that can do it from home. They can do it in their car as they're driving home, and they also log into that Zoom call. And then that way you can have, let's say there's 10 teachers across a high school. If they all log into the Zoom call and you have one person that's monitoring it, then all you need to do if something were to happen was start screaming for help and doing that, and everybody is going to hear that on that Zoom call, and they're going to know where you are because it's right there. It says your name and who you are as a teacher. And so when schools are sitting there saying, how do we protect those few teachers that have to be in the classroom after hours? Very simply, something like that, where you just have a Zoom call that's monitored by at least one other person, and then that person is responsible for helping him. And so you could have two teachers that are on the same, in the same building, and if one of them, they're both on the same Zoom call, and something happens and they start screaming out, the other one knows to call for help and get there. And so these aren't like complex situations where you have to pay someone extra and stuff like that. But even if you're the principal, if somebody says, "Hey, I'm going to be here," the custodial staff is in here, and there's a secretary that's up front that stays till 4, answers the phone till 4:30. Fine, have them just get on a Zoom call. You can minimize it, and you can just have your speakers on. And if something happens, you can call for help. Those are the simple solutions we can have that we can work on in the future until you can start getting notification systems in place and emergency procedures figured out. But that's just something I would strongly recommend is if you are in your classroom after hours with a student, you should have some communication with somebody outside of that classroom. And Zoom I say Zoom, any of these.
Any kind of,
What we're just looking for is somebody that's listening there. And the great thing is like, and I mean this in the best way, but all of these administrators that sit in their office till late at night, they have extra phones and iPads and their own computer. They're not having to give it full-time attention. They're just having to have the volume loud enough that if somebody starts screaming for help, they can look down and see who it is. So they could take an old iPad and just plug it in and have it just sitting on their desk. And usually there's not going to be much noise, or there's going to be noise of maybe the teacher's giving some instructions, stuff like that. Right. But the other thing too is there needs to be a limit on it, right? Like at some point, like if class gets out at 3:15, then 3:45, all students need to be out of the building unless they're, that's the type of stuff you say it is. We don't allow this to go on until 4 or 4:35 o'clock at night. And then the other thing too is that you can record those situations. And so then now all of a sudden with the server, just record the entire day, all that's there. And if there's any questions about sort of what happened in that situation, hey, there was an inappropriate conversation or something like that, then you have the situation where the teacher's profile should be there, and anything they say is recorded. So it's always a good thing. One of the things that's interesting that you did just mention is what are some of the factors that are increasing, this sort of violence and this erratic behavior that we seem to be dealing with in schools. COVID has definitely shown us we have some mental health issues. But the other unfortunate thing that we're not looking at, and the New York Times has done stories on this, there's been USA Today, Dodge City, Kansas has a really good program in place to recognize this. And Dodge City was a result of the fact that it was so, it was close enough to the Colorado border that there were students, maybe they had an older brother or a sibling or something in college, and they were bringing back edibles. We're talking the gummy bears, the gum, just different foods that were infused with THC and stuff like that. And students are consuming this in the classroom. The school that my son goes to, he's about to graduate, they just had a pretty big incident where one of the kids had a huge bag of gummy bears, but it was just in a Ziploc bag. And the SRO asked him about it, and the SRO, finally had to, understand why are people exchanging money for gummy bears, right? I mean, if you have a bag full of gummy bears, usually you just give those away. You don't expect to be paying. And so that's what caught them on. But it was quite a lot, right? This had been going on for quite a long time. And so you have kids that are sitting in the classroom and they're consuming these, gummy bears that are infused with THC and stuff like that. And it's just at the point where it's a balance that schools have to to take because, there's certain students that do better if they're allowed to eat things like peanuts and have protein in the middle of the day and snacks because, like their blood sugar gets low. But candy is not something that anybody would ever recommend. And so I just really believe schools have to, kind of get a hold of this and say, look, no candy at all, right? Like no sugars, no that. It has to be foods that are in a wrapper or, like a granola bar or something like that. Or it has to be something basic like peanuts or seeds or something that is natural in its place. Schools need to start reducing the amount of sort of THC infused foods that are coming into the school. One of the things that's interesting is, and I just kind of, this is the law enforcement, Doug, talking to you real quick, is dogs can be trained to sniff out any item, right? It doesn't matter what it is. Like if your wife wants to know where you keep your cigars, she can go get a dog that's trained on how to, sniff those out, and she'll find where your secret stash of cigars is in the house. That's something that can be done. You just have to train the dog. But dogs are not trained to recognize the THC in the manner in which it is in the candies. And one of the things that people don't understand is that when you cook that candy, it doesn't always alter the THC, but it might alter the way it smells to a dog. So the dog's not going to smell it. And we are talking about such a low quantity of items, edibles is just so small on the scale that it's not advantageous for law enforcement officers to take the thousands of dollars and the time that it takes to train a dog to sniff out edibles. So when you say, hey, can you bring your drug sniffing dog into our school? Maybe you do that randomly or something like that. Understand, unless that dog is specifically trained to detect edibles, it's going to pass those up, and so it's not going to smell those. And so people don't always understand that there's so many drugs out there, from the fentanyl to the cocaine, the methamphetamines, the marijuana. Dogs are trained on 3 or 4 of those, but they're not trained on every single drug, right? There are just some things that they can't detect because they haven't been trained for it. They haven't been told, hey, when you smell this, there's a positive reinforcement with that, and so without that, the dogs are going to just pass it up, and that's kind of the place we've gotten in with the edibles.
Yeah, I had somebody ask me because they legalized medical marijuana in the state I lived in, which when they did this, we all laughed and said, "Well, okay, it's not real hard to get a medical card, so it's really recreational because it's just not that hard." It seems like there's just more. It's more accepted. It's more because the second you legalize anything that's been historically illegal, right?
Right.
Well, now you've given it credibility. You're saying, well, but somebody was saying, well, yeah, but if it's legal, they can't really get in trouble. And I go, well, you can't take beer to school. Beer's legal. I think sometimes people lose sight of the fact that it's still not allowed at school.
Right.
There's.
In Kansas, it was always interesting. People used to ask me, like, well, it's all about knowing the laws and understanding how the legal system works. But in Kansas, if you had let's say you have a $10 bag of marijuana on it, you owe $10 in taxes on that marijuana, and so there has to be a tax stamp on the sticker on the container of the marijuana. And if there's not, you owe double the tax, so you owe $20 for $10. So that's how it was taxed. And really, it was done more to, like, on seizures. If you seize a kilo of cocaine from some drug dealer, well, there's a $20,000 tax stamp on that, and then you owe $40,000 because you didn't have that stamp on there. Well, the cocaine itself is only worth $20,000, so no one ever pays tax, but allows us to go after the profits. Right. The biggest thing, and you just said this, is like they made it legal, and I'm like, and I always say this, like, why are you making things legal? Why not either, there's lots of things you have in your life that are not legal or illegal to own, right? Like, it's like, oh, it's a controlled substance, we should control it. And the answer is no, maybe just get out of the whole system or reduce the penalties to something like just every time is a $25 fine, right? Get rid of the 3 misdemeanor possessions of marijuana, right, become a felony. Just like, nope, if you're caught with marijuana, it's a $25 fine. Right. And so that's the type of thing. And then you still tax it and you still allow it to be sold or something like that. There are just things you can do. But when you legalize it, exactly, you're going to get what you said. And that is, kids look at certain behaviors and say, if it's legal, I'm going to do it. Right. Like that's the way I choose it. And so I totally agree with that. I just think that schools, the biggest thing you have to look for is if you are a family member that gets medical marijuana, or if you have something, that comes along and you decide that this is something that you want in your life, you need to make sure that you are taking active steps to lock that up. And this is where schools need to step in and say, look, if, we need to know if, we don't want to get into your private life and stuff like that, but like if we ask something because we've seen a rapid onset of behavioral change in a student, one of the biggest things that can be about is, the sort of overdosing on edibles, which is the other thing that, people don't understand is that we never really had overdose with marijuana when you smoked it, right? I mean, people don't understand that when you take the resin out of the, when you infuse food with that, it's not always a controlled substance or controlled process. So sometimes you can get too much of that stuff into one little area. Quick little story. This happened in Colorado. It was unfortunate, but somebody was having a party and they thought it'd be funny to take some marijuana resin and pour it into this thing of brownies. Well, they did it after they made the brownies, so they only stirred it about 2 or 3 times. So when they poured it into the pan, all of that resin was literally located, 90% of it was in what would later be one brownie, right? It wasn't properly mixed throughout the whole thing. Well, one person ate that brownie and they ended up having a severe reaction, shock, and they died. And you're like, how did they overdose? And they're like, because they ingested so much of this concentrated resin that it caused them problems. Well, the same thing's happening in our schools is you don't know the process by which this candy is made. It's not controlled. It's not consistent. And so if they're, eating a gummy bear or they're, doing certain lemon drops or whatever the food is that they're eating, it might have too much of that substance in it. And all of a sudden you get this erratic behavioral change from one of your students. It's quite possible that they are experiencing some sort of chemical overdose that we're not aware of. And those are just the type of things schools have to be prepared for.
We're going to put a button on this today, Doug, but I got one quick statement. I'll let you have final thoughts, but they're just schools, administrators, teachers, everybody. We're facing so many more things than we ever have in the past as far as what you have to tell your kids, what you have to educate your kids about, what you have to look for as a parent. And, as a guy who's raised a lot of kiddos, I think as parents, we've kind of relinquished our role as parents sometimes. And we need to start standing up and realizing that these are our children. They're our responsibility. Forget about whether it's legal or responsibility or not. They're your responsibility. I have grown children. I still feel like they're my responsibility in certain areas, right? Things change, your role changes, but you're still their parent. And if a young person unfortunately doesn't have that kind of home life, you got to hope that somebody invests in them and mentors them and tries to help them understand right and wrong and good decisions against poor decisions. And but I feel like, we always look to the school. We always say, well, the school's got to do this. The school, well, I know it's corny. I know it's not popular for parents to hear this. It starts with the parents. I mean, it starts with whoever the adult is in that young person's life. You've got to be active because we've got to do something to stop these things. Teachers we can't find teachers now that want to go into the profession. With crime against staff and teachers going up, it's just going to require more people are going to say, you know what? No. I see the same thing in law enforcement, unfortunately. Less and less people want to go into law enforcement, not because it's not a great profession, or it's because, if you sit around and you don't see people getting support, and if you don't see people, lifting that profession up and giving resources, eventually people are going to stop going to that profession. It's a pretty simple decision. And so I worry about that because there's nothing any more important than the people that are educating our kiddos and our future leaders. But, us at the home, we got to do a better job making sure we're doing our part. And our part is the biggest part. They're there to teach. They shouldn't be there to raise your kids. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox and give you the last word.
I just want to encourage administrators out there to start thinking about what your training is going to be looking like in August. This is the perfect time of the year to kind of create a short little poll. There's several online platforms where you can do it and say, hey, what training would you be interested in? But you understand that there are experts in your community. SafeDefend can help with a lot of these topics if you want us, reach out to us. But, there are experts in your community that can come talk about, edibles. They can talk about cyberbullying. They can talk about human trafficking. And you just need about 15 or 20 minutes, and you just kind of put it in there. And the greatest thing for you is it's going to break up the monotony of the sort of back to school training, where you just have somebody come in and just give a brief description of what to look, indicators of it, what to look for, mental health crisis. Bring these people in. Don't pack them all into one day, where you all of a sudden say, hey, everybody's got 15 minutes and the next 2 hours is going to be these people. Literally come up with the fact that, hey, we're going to have the principal talk for an hour, and then we're going to have the HR director go through their stuff. And after the HR director, then we're going to have this person that's going to come talk for 15 minutes about sort of some interesting topic. And we're going to go back to some of our other stuff. So sparse it out, spread it out throughout the days. And, what we want our teachers to be able to do is to just recognize something that is out of place and realize that there's appropriate steps to be taken to alleviate whatever symptom they're witnessing. And if they don't have the knowledge that this is something that they should be looking at, then they're not going to understand how they need to take steps to move forward with that. And those are just the biggest thing. When it comes to safety, when it comes to the well-being of the kids, when it comes to mental health, if you give them that training, if you put that idea in their head at the beginning of the school year, then when they recognize it later on in the school year, they're going to go, I remember that. What was that story about cyberbullying? Let me go look that up, and let me go see what the resources available are. And they'll take action, and that can benefit the whole community, especially the school district.
Yeah, no question. Well, it's crazy times, and we got to be proactive no matter what you're doing. You've got to be proactive. Being reactive is just a sad place to live. And so be proactive. Reach out to SafeDefend. Doug, the team are there to help you. As always, Doug, we appreciate your time, your expertise, and we look forward to talking to you next week.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Doug.